that experience is very traumatizing. I don't know if you've ever seen somebody get deported, but they literally came to our house. My mom was working in the morning. My dad comes, wakes me up, and he's like, hey, they're going to take me. And I'm like, where are they going to take you, deport you? And I walk out. My two younger siblings are in the house. They put handcuffs on their, or feet cuffs, whatever you call them, on their feet. And then they cuff their hands, and there's a chain that links them. And wow. So, and then at that, after they took him, I'm like, wait, I have to walk back in.
Hey guys, welcome to the Untapped Potential Podcast, where we interview local visionaries. Today we have a special guest, Edgar Salamanca. Edgar is the Executive Director for Communities and Schools based out of North Central Washington. And he also owns a screen printing business called Lions Lab Printing that produces apparel for brands like Dripped. If you're looking at the episode, it'll already be past our launch date, but these are the new hoodies that we dropped Black Friday, Cyber Monday. Make sure to check them out. They're super comfy, and they're also sponsoring this channel. So Edgar, thank you for coming to the show. A lot of things have happened in your area of the world in the past few months. You are, again, the executive director of this nonprofit program. You have a side business. You recently got engaged. I mean, there's a lot that's happening for you. I mean, how are you managing everything right now? Like, what's the stress level for you?
Yeah, no, thank you guys for having me. Like I said, I'm a fan since the beginning. I've seen just about every episode. But yeah, no, in terms of stress management, it's, I feel like that's where I thrive.
Oh, really?
I feel like I've had a conversation with a couple of my close buddies, and I think it comes from like the background of being a first generation and really just having a life of like, sadly, high trauma for the most part of my life. And finally being in a situation where I'm okay, really, truthfully, it's like, I find like, how can I stress myself out? Right. So it's like, it's like just throwing stuff on yourself, trying to at times really overload. But no, definitely. I think that's where I'm at my best, is where, every single day, like hey, I have a timeline, I have a deadline, this and that. So yeah, no, it's stressful at times, but really I feel like I've been in that sort of space and energy my whole life. And I at times I'd like it.
I want to talk about then a little bit about like how you grew up. Were you born in Wenatchee?
Yeah. So I was actually born in Yakima.
Okay.
Yakima, Washington, right? Pretty much in the middle of the state.
Shout out Yakima.
Yeah, shout out Yakima.
Not the best kind of neighborhood. And so my family early found that out. And so we lived in one of the more rougher areas of Yakima. There was a lot of gang violence in the 90s. And so I had a lot of cousins that were involved in like gang activity. And my parents didn't want me to grow up in that sort of energy. And so they actually ended up moving to Wisconsin.
Oh, wow.
So I was raised in Wisconsin, small rural town. We did dairy work. I mean, I've been baling hay since I could walk.
Hold up,
yo, that's crazy.
You don't pronounce it Wisconsin though, like T-Pain?
No. T-Pain was. So there is an accent that comes with Wisconsin. I feel like I probably already lost it. Yeah. And so he was just trying to like emphasize that like accent, that like Midwest.
Oh, so the people out there really say it like that?
No. We say Wisconsin.
Oh, okay.
But for some
sounds
reason,
like it.
Yeah. It kind of sounds like it, and so he over kind of did it. Yeah.
I thought he was just trying to find a word that rhymes with mansion. He was like, "I'll put you in a mansion out in Wisconsin." I was like,
that too. I'm pretty sure it was part of it too.
Song's a banger though.
Oh yeah, classic.
So Wisconsin, man, that's a big change. Like, did your family have, family members over there? How did that?
Yeah. So my dad had a friend, single friend that had moved out that way. And so he was like, hey, there's a lot of work out here. And so my parents did migrant work. So it was seasonal.
Oh, I see.
Nowadays, I feel like migrant agricultural work has found ways to keep employment throughout the year. But back then it was like winter, you're not working.
Oh, interesting.
And so it was pretty rough, kind of growing up in that sort of without consistent income. And so his friend was like, hey, there's a lot of work over here, consistent income. And so he moved first. My dad moved first, and he was out there for, a couple months, and they're like, hey, yeah, like there's a lot of work. It's consistent. And so then our entire family moved out that way.
Oh, gotcha.
How old were you when you moved out there?
First grade. So I'm like 6, 7.
Oh, yeah, damn, so early.
But I mean, you were probably already making like friends in kindergarten, first grade. So that move was probably kind of like, I don't want to leave my friends. I'm comfortable here,
No, the toughest part about that actually was in the school district that I attended to in Yakima, they actually taught Spanish first, unless your parents opted you out.
Oh, interesting.
So being in a Spanish household, I actually didn't know English.
Right.
Right. I could kind of understand it from like friends and cousins and stuff, but I couldn't read or write English. So when I moved over there, our family was the only family in the entire school district that spoke Spanish
And didn't speak any English.
It didn't really speak English.
So how does that work though? If there was like migrant work available where you moved
Mhm.
and there wasn't like those resources, what was the reason for that gap?
In the school?
Yeah.
Well, it wasn't a gap until we got there.
Oh, there
Right.
just literally wasn't.
You created the
but
gap.
Was there other migrant workers there that were also like Spanish speaking, or was your
No.
family literally the
We
only
were
one?
at our school district. I'm sure in other areas of Wisconsin there was,
Right.
right? If you get into like Green Bay, Milwaukee, the bigger cities, I'm sure there was. But in our area, we were our family was the first Spanish speaking like people there.
Man, that's
Wow.
tough.
I remember they didn't have like an English learning program for Spanish speaking students. So I remember when I first started, they hired like a teacher who didn't even know Spanish to teach me English. And I would sit there at recess, like next to a window, trying to learn English. And it was crazy because like I remember struggling with the word the, like till this day I still remember, because in Spanish you spell things out the way they sound. So to me, I was like D-A, duh, right? So it's like D-A, like where's the T and where's the H and why is there an E in this?
Right.
Yeah.
I remember just kind of, so till this day I say that my grammar is bad because they just simply didn't know how to teach me.
Were they
Yeah.
like frustrated at you, or like what was that experience as a kid who couldn't speak English in a school district like that?
Truthfully, I never felt different. And I think
Oh.
part of that is because I was the only kid that was different for the most part. And so I remember like the first time that I felt like they knew I was different, if you will, was like in middle school when kids start taking like foreign languages. And so they started taking Spanish. And so we'd be sitting in the lunch table and they started speaking Spanish and I started answering back.
Oh.
And I was taking French. So they're like, wait, how do you know Spanish? And I was like,
Uh,
what do you mean?
Yeah, like I grew up with this
I
stuff.
was like, I'm Mexican. I only speak Spanish at home. And they're like, what? Since when?
Wow, man. So you were kind of accepted as a kid.
Mhm. In the traditionally conservative state, farmer, like you're back to your question about like migrant work. It wasn't. It was
Right.
just farmers. It's like it's their
Oh,
family. There
gotcha.
isn't like a migrant community because
okay.
it was like local family farmers. Like
Wow.
Well,
They did the
that
work.
brings up my next question. Did you ever feel, or did you or your family ever feel like discriminated against in that area because you guys were the only kind of Mexican
So-
people there?
kind of a super long story, but I'll make it short. My dad actually ended up getting deported.
Oh,
So on
in
that
Wisconsin?
Yeah, so it was just a huge mess, and so he actually ended up getting deported, and my entire family actually ended up moving to Mexico. So up to that point in my life, I had never really felt discriminated there. Like I really felt like I grew up with these kids. They never saw me as an outcast, and by the time that they knew like I was different, I guess, I felt like they already knew me as a person. So it was kind of too late, if you will, for discrimination.
Yeah.
Not to say that as other students start coming in, like I could hear things, right? Like people would say things, but it was never like towards me.
Gotcha.
But yeah, so yeah, never really until it was too late.
What was that like? So you moved to Mexico for a little bit with your family?
I
you said.
didn't.
Oh, you
Oh,
did.
you stayed back here.
I stayed alone. Yeah, and that's actually how I ended up back in Washington. So kind of context to why I actually do what I do too.
Yeah.
When I was a little kid, we had gone to Mexico, and my parents are undocumented, so it's very difficult for them to come back. I had some family that would stay. When it was time to come back, you know, we would cross the border with some family, and they owned a house right across the border, and we would stay there and wait for my parents to cross. And I remember
Gotcha.
like I got like traumatized from that because I was afraid. Like I remember literally like my mom saying like, "Hey, we'll see you guys tomorrow," like kind of explain the situation. And I remember them having a hard time. And when they finally got across, like they had like scars, you know, because they would walk through like the desert, or like all these sketchy things would happen. And so when we got back to Yakima, I remember being so afraid when they would drop me off at school that I would bang on the doors. Sorry. I would bang on like the school doors and the windows. And like, you know, I was just terrified that, you know, you'd always hear about people getting like packing sheds or fields getting raided by
Right.
ICE.
Yeah.
So I was afraid. I was like, I knew how hard it was for them to get across as a kid. So I was like, oh my God, like, you know, like one day, like I could go home and no one's there, you know, and
Right.
what happens to me then? And so the school actually thought that like my parents were abusing me
Oh.
So it got reported. And so, social workers came and they started kind of like investigating or whatever. And then they found out like, no, the kid's just traumatized. And so then I had to go to counseling at a really, really young age.
Wow.
And at some point along that, one of my earliest memories of my life is remember telling myself that when I grew up, I wanted to make sure that kids didn't feel that. And if they did, I wanted to help them with that, because I was one of those kids and that wasn't fair. Like I remember just knowing that wasn't fair, that I felt that.
Yeah.
And so that has what's kind of steered my entire life. And so when my dad ended up getting deported finally, so I always talk about like being resilient and like when you face the greatest fears and challenges in your life, because truth is you probably will at some point or another. So when I finally faced that, I knew the hard thing was to stay here. And I chose that because I had made a promise to myself when I was a kid. There's other kids that are feeling this and other kids that are going through this, and I want to at least help. And so that's kind of the main reason why I stayed. And so I finished my last 2 years in high school with, my family in Mexico. I moved here because I was afraid of judgment and racism, because it was the craziest thing that ever happened in a small rural town. So it was all over the news.
Oh, wow.
I don't want kids to judge me. And so that experience is very traumatizing. I don't know if you've ever seen somebody get deported, but they literally came to our house. My mom was working in the morning. My dad comes, wakes me up, and he's like, "Hey, they're going to take me." And I'm like, "Where are they going to take you, deport you?" And I walk out. My two younger siblings are in the house. They put handcuffs on their, or feet cuffs, whatever you call them, on their feet. And then they cuff their hands, and there's a chain that links them. And
wow.
So, and then after they took him, I'm like, wait, I have to walk back in. Mom's at home. Like, what am I going to tell them? I'm the oldest too. And so, there was a lot of stuff that, kind of went on. And
how old were you at that time?
Yeah.
I was a junior in high school.
So you were about 16, 17, maybe?
So 16, 17.
Wow. So this is like a pivotal point in your life when like you're almost graduating high school. You're like slowly becoming a man, transitioning from like a young boy to a man. And you're suddenly faced with this big responsibility of having to be the leader of your family in a sense, right?
Yeah.
Because the person you looked up to was just taken away.
That's exactly what happened. And so I like all the time in Mexican households, being the oldest, it like all falls on you.
Right.
So I remember vividly, like a lot of family, like always touching base, like with like my sister or my mom, "Hey, how are you guys doing?" But being the older male in the house or whatever, that was never asked. Yeah. So like I remember like at first, like it was so hard on me. Like I would literally not sleep just thinking about things, and I'd like wake up and like kind of talk to myself in the mirror. I feel like that's what kind of helped me. Like I remember so many nights like just kind of like crying, talking to myself in the mirror, like trying to help myself through it.
Did you feel like you had to mask your emotions, kind of like you had to fit that, what I would consider toxic, machismo mentality, where like toxic you had to like be the man in that situation?
Honestly, no, because in my house, and it honestly boils down to my mom. Like in our house, like my dad was never really like that. You get your typical stuff, right, from like a traditional household. But my dad's mom actually died at a very young age, and so he actually his nickname in Spanish is Chiche, which means like boob, because he would when his mom died, he would cry asking to be fed, which is super messed up, but that would be his nickname. Yeah. But point is, like, my dad always kind of like, I feel like missed that like female in his life. Oh. So with him and my mom, like he's always like, for the most part, with exception, like treated her fair. And so my mom always was like in charge of like paying the bills and stuff. So there was never like that weird energy in our house. So when that happened, point is like, I never felt like I have to be the man.
Right. That's good. So you were able to kind of process your emotions and stuff in a healthy way. You were able to cry and like you felt okay doing that. Yeah. You didn't feel guilty for doing that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the only reason why you would hold back, it's like, my mom's going through so much, or like my younger siblings are going through so much. Like, I don't want to add to it. Like, I want them to feel like there's somebody like strong that they can lean into. But it was never like, I need to be the man. Like, it was more like, I want to support them and like show that there's somebody that's strong and stable for them. Like, they have a strong shoulder to lean on versus like a man, right? So there was that pressure where like maybe I wouldn't cry in front of them just because I wanted them to feel comfortable coming to me like, oh, he's okay. Like, let me go cry to him.
Mm-hmm. Right. Gotcha. And so what was life after high school for you?
Yeah. Life after high school. I mean, it was, again, my parents had gone to Mexico. And so I was living here with an aunt in Wenatchee. And so went to college. That's difficult, right? A lot of the time, like sports that I was traditionally involved in, I had to let go and work. I remember in high school, I would actually go work in the fields in the morning before school, and then I'd go to school, and then I was the supervisor at a Taco Bell.
Oh,
so I'd actually, after school, I'd go, and like the shift doesn't end. Like I was the closing like manager.
2 a.m.
Yeah. So I was like there till 2 a.m. and you got to go in the fields at 5 by sunrise. You know, so it was like, I was sleeping like 3-4 hours. Yeah.
Wow, man.
Yeah. It was tough, but I mean, again, at that point, it's like my family had moved, and I'm like, I stayed, like I felt privileged compared to like my brother and my sister. I'm like, they had to like go. I'm like, I have to make it work. And truthfully, I did bad. Like I struggled through school, but there's one thing for sure, like I wasn't going to give up. And so I always say like, I felt like I was like a goat, you know, and like goats are like climb, not because I'm the greatest of all time, but literally, you know how goats will like on ledges, like on crazy ledges.
Yeah, mountain goats will like be literally on the side of a mountain, just with like, you can't even tell what they're standing on. But yeah, I get
that's literally how I felt like my college experience was. It was just hanging on by a thread.
That's great. Did with your dad being deported before you went to college, did you ever consider just not going to college, or did you see that as a path of like, yeah, I have to do this now for sure?
I mean, yeah, there was a lot of times where, you know, you feel like giving up. Like actually, when I used to work at our local community college, one student once asked me like, hey, Edgar, did you ever feel like giving up? I was like, yep, every single day. You know, there was every single day, like there were so many reasons why I should give up. And I had no one telling me really that school was the right thing, but I just felt like it was the right thing. I was like, there's so many, every door that I can open without school, I was like, I can open with school, but school is going to open even more doors. So that was kind of my logic, right? I didn't know if it was the right thing, but I know for sure it was going to open more doors than if I didn't go to school. And if I went to school, all the doors that I could open before school would still be available to me. So it just made sense, I feel like, to me.
Right. It wouldn't hurt.
Exactly. It was that type of mentality. And it was also like the sacrifice, right? My family, I'm sacrificing. We're sacrificing, not just me, right? My family was sacrificing being apart from each other. And I felt like that was like a justifiable way. Where like if I gave up, it's like, well, what was it? Why didn't I just leave with them?
Yeah.
Are you the first in your family to go to college?
Yeah.
Gotcha.
First one. And now my younger brother went to school. And so, yeah.
Did you have people to lean on when you went to college? Kind of like, I don't know, like a mentor, an advisor that kind of helped you out during those first few years?
Definitely. Yeah. I was part of, at our local community college, I was a part of the college assistant migrant program. So I always, I always tried to look for resources to help. So I always knew I needed help. And I think it also goes back to my mom, right? Like it wasn't prideful.
Right.
Like I didn't have that toxic pride that sometimes you can see in traditional Mexican males. Yeah. So I was always looking for help. I'm like, hey, I need help. There's a bunch of stuff going on. Like, I don't want to give up. Like, help. And so when I went to the university, to Washington State University, I was always involved. I was always trying to get different part of programs. I joined a fraternity where, you know, the goal was to empower each other from similar backgrounds. That's again, back to that story. That's why I joined that fraternity, because it was other people with experiences like mine, and I wanted to help motivate each other to succeed. And so, I was always looking for help.
Gotcha. Okay. And so you did 2 years in community college, and then you transferred to Wazoo, right? Which is where we met.
Right.
What was that like for you, switching out? Because, you know, that's a big move. You know, you're moving out of your hometown to a whole other university. A lot of people that don't really come from your background too. What was that like?
I actually did, again, going back to being a horrible student, right. I did, and also getting back to your point of giving up. I actually did 3 years at my community college. Gotcha. And I applied to WSU, and I actually didn't get accepted.
Oh, the first time you did it?
Yeah, I didn't get accepted. And so then there's the appeal process. And it goes back to the camp program, you know, me feeling like, oh, shoot, like I felt like my world was like torn apart. I was like, dang, like I let everybody down. I didn't even get accepted. This is the end of the road for me, you know? And so the camp program, the academic advisor talked to me like, hey, no, there's an appeal process. Like, we'll help you through it. And so, you know, we began the appeal process. And I didn't believe in myself at this point. I had given up. And so I was like, you know what? Like, not submitting it. This is it. I was actually working as a salesman for a car dealership in town, and I was doing pretty good. Honestly, I was making really good money. And so I was like, you know, I wanted to go to school. They said, no, I'm doing okay financially right now. Like, this is it. I'll just stick to this. And so my fiance, shout out my fiance, knew my password because I have the same password for everybody, for everything at that point. One of those things. So she knew my password, and she knew that I had given up on myself and that I wasn't going to submit it. So she submitted it.
Oh,
Power
wow.
move. That's a power move.
So one day I'm working, right? Like writing up a deal or whatever. And she like calls me and I step out and she's like, hey, Edgar, guess what? I'm like, what's up? She's like, you got accepted to WSU. And I'm like, no, I didn't. She's like, no, yeah, you did. I was like, dude, I never submitted the appeal. She's all like, I knew you wouldn't, so I did.
Wow.
So like I did give up on myself.
What was your thought when you heard that?
I honestly, I started crying. I was like,
Wow.
what? Like
disbelief.
Yeah,
you know?
it was like, dang, like, and it just proved it once again, right? You have to stay resilient no matter what, like, regardless on how like much you don't believe in yourself, or surround yourself with people that do believe in you, right? Because sometimes you do need that encouragement, and it's okay, right? So it was just like so real, like, dang, like she's a real one, you know?
That's crazy.
I found her,
man.
she's the one.
Solid, yeah.
That's awesome. And so Wazoo, you pull up first day on campus. What was that like?
Yeah, again, I just wanted to find like support. It was so massive, right? Like it just felt crazy. It felt like I had achieved my dream, really, just being there.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm like, oh my God, like this the stadium, you know,
Yo.
like the windows in the library. It just felt like just being there was an accomplished dream, really. It felt like this like one thing that I sacrificed everything for, that I even gave up on myself, and like finally I was there. Like it was just honestly, to me, it was a position of privilege, just being there. So I was just so thankful. I was like, I'm not gonna waste this.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And so you did 2 years there at Wazoo?
3 again.
3 years.
Yeah,
okay,
3
got
again.
you. And what was that like? Like, what are some lessons you learned during those 3 years at WSU about yourself?
Yeah, I think, and I see this a lot. Like, I think in life, as you're trying to find yourself and figure yourself out, I think that's the beauty of going to college too. It gives you time. Like a lot of the younger people that I've seen that don't go to school, sometimes they stay back home, they start making money, and they don't make good decisions because you're not mature yet, right? You haven't figured life out, really, just in general. And so that's the beauty about college, is it truthfully, it does allow you to make those mistakes. And it almost like, in a way, like with your social groups, it asks for it, right? It asks you to kind of like trip on yourself, to go out, to do things that maybe aren't the best choice and the most responsible things to do, but it gives you time to grow out of that stage, right? And it's like, then you can come back to society. It's like, okay, go mess up and then come back. But no, more than anything, I learned to be appreciative. I learned to, you know, be resilient, not give up on myself, keep fighting. And truthfully, like now having a job, I learned to like time management, right? And it's like, as much as sometimes things suck and like just sitting down, sometimes like the desk components of like work, you learn that. And those are things that my parents as a first generation student couldn't teach me, right? Or my parents being in Mexico, they couldn't teach me like, hey, especially working from home. Like, I don't know if your guys' jobs.
Oh, you work from home too?
I'm like a hybrid. Like
Gotcha.
we have an office, but there's like 3 days out of the week that I go to the office.
Okay, yeah.
And so working from home, I'm like, oh, this is college. Like,
Yeah. I mean, you just wiggle the mouse a little bit and just start playing games.
Don't
and
say
it's
that on
easy.
camera.
Well, it's easy to get distracted is the point, right?
exactly. Yeah.
And I think the discipline, especially now that I'm thinking about my own experience from college, is you learn a lot of that through, because, you know, with all of us, all three of us, we were heavily involved in, you know, outside external activities that we needed to show up and be responsible for. So I think that you hit the nail on the head. It's a really good way of just teaching you time management. But I think it's also a good segue of what you're doing now with communities and schools. As you've explained it before we talked on the podcast, you kind of focus on helping students in their overall life, not just school. And so that goes back to what you were saying is, you know, you don't want this feeling of hopelessness. You don't want that feeling on somebody else. So I'd like to know a little bit more around like how you help kind of curb that with the program that you're responsible for.
Yeah. So with our program is we have site coordinators at each school. And so traditionally, a lot of like exterior programs or nonprofits or any entity that comes into a school usually does like before or like after school programming. Our program focus is there throughout the entire school day. And that goes back to that thing of like helping the whole student. So we don't just help, and traditionally schools have also just focused like on really academics for the most part. And the reason for that is because that's all they like can expand to. Like they're just most schools are short staffed, especially right now. And so a lot of the times they're operating very reactively. And so having a program like us allows us to sit down with students, because they're students we case manage, and really sit down and look at their needs, assess their needs, right? The school doesn't have time to sit down and be like, hey, what are your needs? Right? So we sit down with our case managed students, and we literally assess them, like, what are your needs? And we create goals, right? We try to be proactive, like goals, this is what you're going to try to achieve, and like really motivate the kids and inspire them. Not just in high school, we do K through 12. So we start ingraining these type of things since they start going to school.
Right.
And so, yeah. And working with them, a lot of the time you find some of those gaps and some of those things that are missing, because again, traditionally school, if a kid is struggling in math, they need math tutoring. That's not the way we think. If a kid is struggling at math, what's going on that's preventing him from succeeding? And sometimes they're just hungry. They don't have food at home, right? Or they have an abusive dad, or right, they're afraid of like deportation, right? Like all these other things. So we dig into it, find it, and a lot of the time it is us working with the family, the parent, connecting and supporting them, so that then they can support their child, so that then they can succeed.
Oh, gotcha. So you kind of look at like the root cause of what's inhibiting them from learning, and that's what you try to fix.
What are some of the most common issues that you see in students?
It varies. And we also we primarily focus in rural communities. So a lot of like nonprofits primarily focus in more urban settings. So the needs are also drastically different. The demographics could also vary, but where we're at, poverty is very common. And so poverty is just a can full of worms, right? Like, I mean, it's just everything. It's food, right? We have weekend backpack programs that we do. So kiddos at the end of the week come, we give them meals for the rest of the week, right? And so with that, sometimes it's behavioral issues. So we'll have kids that like lash out in school because they're angry at the world, because there's a lot of stuff going on. Parents that do like drug or alcohol abuse, kids living with like other people that aren't their parents, right? So behavior is pretty common where, they lash out because they're just mad.
Wow. And that's so crazy. And I think it's important to state that, because, some people, they just judge a book by its cover, and they see a kid who's acting out, maybe at the store, maybe you're just walking down the street and you just judge a book by its cover. But, programs like yours, they're actually helping the root cause and helping the kid, at the root of the issue, at home.
And that's one of the things that I've been privileged to have the opportunity to support as we develop our affiliate in staffing. And so that's one of the things that I focus on, make sure that like the staff that we hire match the demographics of the school, right? And so I know schools might not be set up where they're matching the demographics of their student, but if I can do anything to try to like represent that one student that feels alone, like I'm going to hire somebody to try to represent that student, right? So in doing so, it allows us to have conversations with kids, and they're more willing to open up because they feel comfortable and they feel like, hey, this is my one person here. And so I there's one experience that I can think of with the behavioral thing is I would take the kids during lunch to play basketball. And there's a kid that just lashed out at me, just mad,
really
freaked out. And I was like, hey, like, it's cool, man. Like, go talk to the principal. Like, I'm not going to get you in trouble. I'm not someone to get you in trouble. Like, so he went and talked to the principal. Later on, I pulled him out of class. And I'm like, hey, what's going on? I was like, I know here they know you as a bad student to me, or like the troubled student, if you will, or whatever. And I was like, to me, what that tells me is there's something going on. Why are you mad? What's going on in your life? And I became that one go-to person. Whenever he was going to like lash out at the teacher, he would just go to my class and he'd just start venting. And then like I started to tell like the school and the teachers what was going on in this kid's life. And they're like, oh my God, what? No wonder he's mad.
Wow.
Nobody's probably ever asked him that, right?
Yeah. Nobody sat down. They're like, dude, you're mad.
They just
what? Why are you mad? Like what? And then, so then he'd tell like the surface level, like, oh, well, you wouldn't let me do this or that. And I'm like, nah.
You're not mad at that. You're mad at something else.
Right. Yeah. Do you think labels are important too? Like when you label a student like that's a bad student, they kind of fit that criteria, right? Because they're already put with that label.
And it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're problematic for sure. And it's really difficult not to do it, right? As humans, sometimes it's hard, right? And so teachers talk to each other. right? So a lot of the time, if a kid was like a troubled or whatever student in kindergarten, when he goes up to like the first grade, second grade, third grade teachers, they're telling each other like, oh, this student, this, that. And so then the teacher starts approaching that student different. And then that student remembers what certain approaches meant. It's like, oh, I'm supposed to lash out. They lash out, right? So they are problematic for sure. And a lot of the time it's having conversations like that. I'm a sociology major and I tend to overanalyze everything. And so, yeah.
Well, I mean, that helps kind of paint a picture in your head where this kid is coming from, right? And so developing that line of empathy is really important when you're trying to help a student's overall life, not just, making sure that they go to school. So I think that's really cool. How many kids then, are you able to say how many kids are in this program in general?
Yeah. So on average, Communities in Schools, our nonprofit, asks that we do a 10% minimum of the student body. Oh, okay. So based on your school. So if you have a school of, 100 kids, it's 10. But again, since we've focused in rural, we're kind of, in a way, like a little bit of pioneering the way it looks. And so sometimes a smaller school district. So for example, one of the schools that we serve has about 175 students. So, 25 students, that's a very small caseload. So 20 students is very small. So we do like 30.
Round up a little bit.
Mm-hmm. I see. So it can vary. But again, a lot of the time those students are very high intensity. Yeah. So they have a lot of everything's going on in their lives. Right. So we just it's a fine balance where, it's our admin staff communicating with our site coordinators to try to find a fine balance for them and their school.
How can people donate to the program?
Yeah. So as we're starting, people can go on our website. So it's Communities in Schools of North Central Washington. And at the very bottom, there's a donate section. So if anybody wants to donate, right there, the little hand.
Oh, there it is.
Mm-hmm. And so people can go on the website. They can reach out to me. So if they have like a specific like thing, like we have people all the time where they're like, hey, or they'll reach out to me like, hey, what can we help out with? Because we're working with the communities. Another thing, a conversation that I just had with a potential donor this past week was that a lot of the time what happens is that people come and they try to donate like the same thing. And we have like excess amount of things. So for example, the winter, like everybody's like, oh my God, it's getting cold. Kids need jackets and boots, right? So sometimes, and there's a lot of like nonprofits that we're connected with that help us out a lot. Not to say that we don't need jackets and boots, because truth is we probably do. But a lot of the times we'll know like very niche things that we may need as well. So I know tax season's coming up. So if y'all need write-offs, hit me up.
Yeah, it's a 501c. It's a nonprofit. So you can get that tax deduction. We'll have all the links in the description of the YouTube video. But what I want to do now is kind of pivot into something else that you're really passionate about. It's this screen printing business. So obviously at the beginning of the podcast, we mentioned that you do all of our apparel items for Dripped. Yeah, I just want to talk about like what got you into screen printing, because that is such a powerful skill that a lot of people don't have, and you don't really see people just start a hobby like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So again, cool thing is that they actually offered screen printing in my high school in Wisconsin. And I remember same thing, thinking like, oh, this is so interesting, so cool. Like I want to take this class. And so I took the class in high school, one class in high school. I mean, how much could I have actually learned?
Yeah.
Point is like I had done the thing before. Like I had like a kind of idea. And so once I graduated from high school and once I finally was living like not paycheck to paycheck, so I started to accumulate a little bit of a savings. I wanted to do more with that money. I didn't want it just sitting there. And I was like, oh. And at the time I was working at the college, and there's a lot of clubs and a lot of constant need for t-shirts. And what I found was that a lot of the companies that do exist in screen printing, they don't want to do smaller jobs. Yeah. Like they want these massive jobs, and like they have all these requirements. And I was like, well, I kind of know how to do this. I wonder how much the machines are worth, so then I started doing research into that, and I was like, oh, sure, why not? And so I just kind of started dumping money into that, kind of my savings into screen printing stuff. And so it was kind of challenging at first, because a huge component of it is graphic design as well. Even if people send you, like if they design things, you still have to convert it a lot of the time in many different ways for it to be printable. And based on what you're printing, how you want it to look, it can change. Yeah. So I took a lot of like classes on Adobe.
Oh, I see. They provide those resources for you.
Yeah. So I took a couple of those classes on like, graphic design, YouTube. huge help, you know.
Huge.
And so that's the beauty too that school taught me. Like I genuinely feel like I can learn anything.
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't care what it is, I can learn it. And I'm like, I don't know graphic, dude. I can YouTube it. Like, how do I do this? And it pops up, right? So
yeah, isn't that crazy? It used to be a huge barrier for us to do something because we didn't know what to do, and the risk of failure or wasting money on something would prevent us from actually trying. But with YouTube, you just see what somebody else is doing and just mirror that same exact process. It's amazing. Yep. So I guess tell me a little bit about like the complexity around what goes into screen printing, because I feel like a lot of people think that you just put a shirt down and you just wipe some paint on it and call it a day. But you're saying, I mean, obviously it's a really involved process. Mm-hmm. Just tell us a little bit about like what that looks like for you.
Yeah, it's so funny. So many people, and a lot of the time actually for like my return customers, I actually ask that they come a lot of the time, like, hey, come in. Like when they come to pick up their things or whatever, I'm like, hey, come in, so I can show them the setup. And then they see it and they're like, oh,
like, this is what you guys are doing.
Like, they often think, like, heat transfer vinyl, because that's, like, the common thing.
Yeah.
Like, oh, dude, I thought you were just, like, pressing the thing on. It's like, yeah, just 10 seconds done. Like, I was like, why is this guy taking forever? You know? Right. And then, like, usually, like, I'll walk him through everything. And so, yeah. So, back to, like, I guess, kind of the way it kind of works. A lot of it starts with the design. Well, it starts with the conversation with the person. And so a lot of the time is having conversations like, hey, what are you looking for? And the other thing is pricing. Like sometimes I feel like people think like I'm being rude or something. Like he doesn't want to just give me a price. Yeah. And it's like, well, it varies, right?
It really does.
The garment that you're printing on. So if you're printing on a darker garment and you want like a vivid colors, you need to lay a white. Mm-hmm. So a darker garment will be more expensive than a lighter garment. So I need to have all these conversations. How many colors? And so I hate to just like text it, because I'm like, well, I can adapt it. We can like edit your design. Right. Like I'll be affordable. I'll give you the best price. But let's just talk. What do you want? What do you want to pay? And so a lot of the time, like I will have those conversations, or if people just want like a text, I'll send a text, and sometimes it pushes them away. But a lot of it, and then they come back later when they go get other quotes. Like, hey, so
this guy's trying to charge me $3,000 for 2 shirts, man.
Oh, for a minimum of like 300. Oh, fuck. Okay, I guess Edgar was actually giving me a fair price.
Oh, that's cool, man. You're doing a lot for real. Like you're doing great things, you know, for the community with communities and schools, and you're also doing the screen printing, which is like a hobby of yours, really, right?
Yeah, that's more so what it is. I don't consider it like any sort of like form. It's just passive like income. Like, let me hang out. And even though it's not hanging out, trust me, it's a lot of hours.
It's a grind.
Yeah, it's a grind.
Just to make a screen, that the thing has to dry. Like just to make a screen, to make the stencil, if you will, to print, can take like 2 days. Right?
It's art form.
You have to let it dry and cure and all that. Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. So you're doing a lot, man, but I appreciate the time that you took to come down and join us for this episode. I can't imagine it wasn't an eye-opening experience for many people, especially ones who grew up in a really difficult environment to succeed in. And so I'm glad that you're doing it, and you're providing a good example and being a good role model, and also giving back to the community through the work that you do in communities and schools, man. So really proud of you, man. Thank you for coming through.
No, thank you guys for having me. It's an honor. I hope I live up to the standard of your guys' guests in here.
Oh, man, you blew it away. Yeah, thanks for sharing your story, Edgar.
Yeah, thank you.
And make sure to like, subscribe, and catch us next time. We have more episodes coming every Wednesday. And so, stay tuned.